Hey guys, just want to say thanks for tuning in to Wide Awake Horror today. Today we've got some true horror stories for you guys to hear. Now, if you enjoy these stories, as always, please smash that like button. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join the family. Now, let's enjoy some new stories.
The worst part is not even the money. It is the video. That is what sticks. The video of him sitting somewhere bright and clean, laughing like he had just won something, like I was a punchline he had been building up to for weeks. I matched with Riyadh on a random Tuesday night when I could not sleep. I was on my couch in my tiny apartment, half watching some cooking show and half swiping out of boredom. His profile looked normal. He was a doctor, internal medicine, worked long shifts, like hiking and black coffee. There were pictures of him in scrubs, one in front of a hospital sign, one at some beach with wind in his hair. He looked tired but kind. I remember thinking he had soft eyes. We started talking that night and it felt easy. He would send long messages about his shifts, about patients he could not stop thinking about how exhausting it was to care that much. I felt special that he trusted me with that stuff. He said he did not really date because of his schedule, and because most women did not understand how intense his job was. Somehow that turned into him telling me I was different, that I listened, that I felt steady. After about 2 weeks, he told me he had a problem. He had medical school debt and a private loan that was crushing him. He said his family could not help and he was embarrassed even bringing it up. He did not ask right away. He just kept mentioning how stressed he was, how he was picking up extra shifts, how he had not slept properly in days. I started feeling anxious for him. I would check my phone constantly to see if he had made it through another shift. Then one night he told me he was about to lose his apartment because he had fallen behind. He said if he could just cover one payment, he would be able to stabilize everything. He said $5,000 would fix it. He did not demand it. He said he hated himself for even thinking of asking. That is what got me. It felt I was stepping in to rescue someone who saved lives every day. I had savings. Not a lot, but enough that $5,000 would not ruin me. It was money I had been putting aside to maybe move somewhere bigger. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself he would pay me back once his next contract bonus came through. He sent me a bank transfer link and a long message about how grateful he was. I remember staring at the confirm button for a full minute before pressing it. The second the transfer went through, he sent me a heart emoji. After that, things got weird. He said he had to focus on work and would be less available for a bit. At first, I thought that made sense. Doctors are busy. But the messages got shorter. Then hours would pass. Then a full day. I tried to act chill about it, like I was not checking his profile to see if he was still active. 3 days after I sent the money, I woke up and saw that his account was gone. Our message thread had vanished. His name did not show up in my matches. I felt this heavy drop in my stomach, like missing a step on the stairs. I tried to tell myself it was a glitch. I searched his name online. There were doctors with that name, but none matched his pictures exactly. I started noticing small details I had ignored. His hospital badge had been slightly blurry. The beach photo could have been anywhere. I sat on my bed holding my phone, going through my bank app over and over, as if the money would magically reappear if I refreshed enough times. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a notification for a number I did not recognize. It was a video file. I opened it without thinking. It was him, or at least the guy from the photos. Sitting in what looked like a cafe, leaning back in his chair. He was laughing, not just smiling, actually laughing. There was no sound for the first second because my volume was low, but when I turned it up, I could hear him clearly. He was talking to someone off camera, saying something about how easy it was, about how people want to believe in heroes. Then he lifted his coffee cup and grinned straight at the camera. My face felt hot. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. I watched the video 3 times and my brain was refusing to process it. It felt staged, like a prank show reveal, except there were no cameras jumping up to tell me it was all a joke. I tried calling the number. It went straight to voicemail. I texted. Nothing. I emailed the address he had used for the transfer. It bounced back. For the next week, I moved through my life like I was underwater. I went to work, smiled at coworkers, answered emails, but in my head I kept replaying every message we had sent. Every moment I had defended him to myself. I felt stupid. Not just sad. Stupid. I reported the transfer to my bank. They told me because I had authorized it willingly, there was not much they could do. I filed a police report online, typing out the story in this blank white box that made everything look smaller than it felt. No one ever followed up. What messed with me most was how calculated it had been. He had built this character so carefully. The exhausted doctor. The overworked good guy who just needed a little help. He knew exactly when to bring up the debt, exactly how to make it seem like my idea. I started noticing news articles about similar scams and felt sick realizing I was just another name on a list somewhere. I stopped using dating apps after that. Every time I saw someone in scrubs or with some heroic job title, my chest tightened. I started second-guessing everything people told me. If a guy said he liked hiking, I would wonder if the mountain in his photo was even real. A month later, I got another message from a different unknown number. Just a single screenshot. It was my profile picture from the app, circled in red, with a caption under it that said generous. I did not respond. I just blocked the number and sat there staring at the wall. $5,000 is a weird amount. It is not small enough to ignore, but not big enough to completely wreck your life. It just lingers. Every time I look at my savings account, I see the dip where it used to be. I think about the trip I could have taken, the bigger apartment I could have moved into, the things I could have done for myself instead of trying to save someone who did not exist. Sometimes I still picture him in that cafe, laughing like he had cracked some brilliant joke. I wonder how many videos like that he has sent. How many women have watched him celebrate their trust like it was a trophy. I never heard from him again after that second screenshot. No apology. No threat. Nothing. Just silence. The last thing I did was delete every photo he had sent me. I sat on my floor and cleared out my camera roll one image at a time until there was nothing left but my own reflection in the black screen. I did not tell anyone about Tia for months because every time I tried to explain it out loud, it sounded fake, like one of those dumb stories people make up for attention. It started on a random Friday when I was in a good mood for no reason. I had just moved into a new place with big windows, and I was still in that phase where everything felt possible. New couch, new job, new area. I remember standing in my living room that morning thinking, this is it. This is my reset. I matched with Tia that night. Her profile was simple. Short brown hair, big smile, oversized hoodie in one picture, dressed up at some rooftop bar in another. She looked relaxed, not trying too hard. Her bio said she liked late-night drives and bad horror movies. That alone felt refreshing compared to the intense career speeches some guys put in their bios. We started messaging, and it felt normal. Easy jokes, random questions, nothing forced. She asked about where I grew up, and I told her about the small town I used to live in before moving to the city. She told me she had moved around a lot. She would send voice notes sometimes, and her voice sounded soft, kind of low but warm. I did not think anything of it. After a week of talking, we planned to meet at this arcade bar downtown. I got there early because I am always early to everything. I was standing near the entrance pretending to scroll through my phone so I would not look awkward. Every time the door opened, I looked up. Then I saw someone walking toward me holding their phone like they were checking a photo. Short brown hair, oversized hoodie, same smile. But something felt slightly off. I could not even place it at first. Just a weird hesitation in my brain. They walked up and smiled and said my name. I smiled back automatically. Up close, the features were sharper than in the pictures. Jawline more defined, shoulders broader. I felt that confusion flicker again, but brushed it off. We went inside and started playing games. It was fun at first. We laughed over how bad we both were at air hockey. We shared fries. It felt almost too easy. But as the night went on, I noticed little things. The voice sounded deeper in person than in the voice notes. The way Tia moved felt different from how I had imagined. I told myself I was overthinking it. Nerves do weird things. About an hour in, we were sitting at a small table with neon lights flashing everywhere. I finally asked a casual question about something from her profile, just trying to ground myself. The answer was vague. Then there was this pause, a strange pause. Tia leaned back in the chair and started smiling in a way that did not match the moment. It was not shy or flirty. It was like someone waiting for a reaction. Then it happened. Tia told me it was a prank. Not in a playful way. Not like a lighthearted reveal. more like they had been waiting all night to drop it. Tia said her real name was not Tia. Said she and her friends sometimes made profiles to see how far they could get before someone noticed. Said it was social commentary about how people do not really pay attention. My ears were ringing. I felt heat crawl up my neck. I looked around the bar, suddenly convinced someone was filming. I pictured a group of people laughing somewhere. The person in front of me admitted they were a man, that the pictures had been edited, that the voice notes were filtered, that the whole thing was meant to be ironic. I just sat there staring. My brain was trying to catch up. I felt embarrassed in this deep, heavy way. Not because someone was trans or anything like that. That was not it. It was the lying, the setup, the idea that my genuine interest had been turned into some kind of experiment. I asked why me. The answer was casual, random, wrong place, right time. He said I had seemed open-minded, that he thought it would be interesting to see how long it would take before I noticed. He said it like it was a harmless game. I stood up. I do not even remember grabbing my jacket. I just remember the noise of the arcade suddenly feeling too loud, flashing lights everywhere, people laughing like nothing, and just shifted. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. I walked fast without knowing where I was going. My phone buzzed almost immediately with messages from the app. Paragraphs about how I should not take it personally, about how it was meant to challenge assumptions. I blocked the account while standing on the sidewalk. When I got home, my new apartment did not feel like a reset anymore. It felt exposed. I kept replaying every message we had exchanged. Every time I had opened up about something small, like how I missed my old town sometimes, had that been screenshot and sent to a group chat? Had people laughed about my answers? The next morning, I woke up to a message request from an unknown account on social media. It was a clip, short, filmed from across the arcade bar. You could see me sitting at the table, leaning forward, smiling. The caption said, "Social Experiment Part 3. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I was going to throw up. I reported the video immediately. I did not know how many people saw it before it was taken down. Maybe only a few, maybe more. The account disappeared within hours, but that did not make it better. It just made it feel more intentional. For weeks after that, I avoided that part of downtown. I avoided arcade bars entirely. I felt this constant paranoia that someone would recognize me, that someone had read the comments before it disappeared and memorized my face. I started questioning my own instincts. How had I not noticed sooner? Were there obvious signs? I went back through old screenshots of the profile, analyzing everything like I was solving a crime. The lighting in the photos, the angles, the slightly blurred edges around the hair. I felt angry, but mostly I felt stupid, like I had been cast in a show without consent. A few of my friends told me to laugh it off, said it was just a prank, but it did not feel light. It felt invasive. It felt like someone had taken a normal human interaction and twisted it for entertainment. I kept thinking about that moment in the bar when he leaned back and smiled, like he had been waiting for applause. I deleted the app after that. Not dramatically, just quietly. One night I was sitting in my living room, phone in hand, and I realized I did not want to scroll anymore. I did not want to risk being content in someone else's experiment again. A month later, I ran into someone from work who mentioned they had seen a weird dating prank video online that got taken down fast. My chest tightened, but I acted casual. I did not ask details. I did not want confirmation. Sometimes I wonder if he ever thinks about me as a real person or just as part of his project. I wonder if he ever considers that I went home that night feeling humiliated in a way that stuck for weeks. My new apartment eventually started to feel like mine again. I rearranged the furniture, painted one wall a different color, invited friends over so the space would have better memories attached to it. But every once in a while, when I walk past an arcade or hear those bright game sounds, I feel that same flash of confusion. That split second when the person you think you are meeting turns out to be something else entirely. I never heard from him again after the video was removed. No apology. No follow-up, just silence. And that is how it ended. I should have known something was off the first time she told me she had cut her parents out of her life over politics, and then changed the subject so fast it felt like she had slammed a door. But when you like someone, you let things slide. You tell yourself it is complicated. You tell yourself families are messy. I met Amza on a Sunday afternoon when I was half asleep and half bored, scrolling through profiles while laundry spun in the background. Her pictures were clean and curated. Good lighting, coffee shops, one shot of her standing in front of a mural with her hands in her pockets like she did not care who was watching. Her bio was short but dramatic, said she believed in cutting off anything that did not align with her values, said loyalty mattered more than comfort. We matched and started talking that same day. She was sharp, fast replies, witty. She made fun of my music taste within 5 messages and somehow made it charming. Within a week, we were texting constantly. She told me she had moved to the city 2 years ago and had basically rebuilt her life from scratch. When I asked about her family, she said she was estranged, that they did not support her beliefs, that she had chosen her own peace over blood ties. I respected that. It sounded strong, like she had drawn a line and stuck to it. We met in person at a bookstore cafe near where I live. She walked in wearing this oversized blazer and looked completely at ease, like she had done this 100 times. We talked for hours. About work, about travel, about random childhood memories. She told stories in a way that made her the main character every time. I noticed that but brushed it off. Some people are just confident storytellers. Over the next month, we started spending more time together. She came over to my place a lot. She liked my couch, said it felt expensive. It was not. She would comment on little things like how quiet my building was, how nice it must be to not worry about rent every month. I laughed it off, thinking she was joking. One night, after a couple drinks, she opened up more about her parents. She said they had always tried to control her, that they did not approve of her lifestyle or her goals. She painted this picture of them being rigid and unsupportive. She said they cut her off financially after she refused to follow their expectations. That detail stuck with me. Cut her off financially. I asked if she had talked to them recently. She said no, that she had blocked them everywhere, that it was freeing. A few weeks later, she told me she had to go back to her hometown for something quick. She was vague about it. Said it was paperwork related. She asked if I wanted to come. I hesitated, but she insisted it would be good for me to see where she grew up. I thought maybe this was a sign she was serious about me. We drove out on a Friday morning. It was about 2 hours away. She seemed tense the entire ride, tapping her fingers on the steering wheel, checking her phone constantly. When we pulled into this quiet suburban neighborhood with big houses and perfectly trimmed lawns, I felt confused. This did not match the story of being cut off and struggling. We parked in front of a large house with a wide porch and 2 cars in the driveway that looked brand new. She sat there for a second before getting out. I followed. The door opened before we knocked. A woman in her late 50s stood there, smiling like she had been waiting. She hugged Amza immediately. Not awkward, not distant, warm. I froze on the porch. Inside, the house was spotless. Framed family photos everywhere. Pictures of Amzi at different ages. Graduation photos. Vacations. Nothing looked fractured or estranged. Her father came into the living room and shook my hand firmly. He seemed polite but slightly guarded, like he was assessing me. We sat down and had coffee. I kept waiting for tension, for some sign of the political conflict she had described. Instead, the conversation felt normal. Her mom asked about my job. Her dad asked how we met. There was no hostility, no icy silence. At one point, her mom mentioned how worried they had been when Amzi stopped answering calls last year, how they did not understand why she had shut them out over money. Over money. My ears sharpened instantly. Her mom kept talking, saying they had always supported her but could not keep funding her rent in the city when she quit her job without a plan, that they had offered help as she came home and regroup, but she refused. Amzi shifted in her seat and tried to steer the conversation away, but it was too late. Pieces were clicking into place in my head. After lunch, her dad asked to speak with me outside for a minute. We stepped onto the porch. He looked tired more than angry. He said he hoped I knew what I was getting into. That Amzi had a pattern of jumping from relationship to relationship, moving in quickly, relying on the stability of whoever she was dating. He said they loved her, but they were done being her safety net. I felt like the ground had tilted. When we got back in the car to leave, the energy was completely different. She was quiet for a while, then defensive. She said her parents always twisted things to make her look irresponsible. She said they never understood her ambitions. She accused them of trying to manipulate me. But the details did not add up anymore. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing more. She spent most nights at my place. Her apartment was suddenly too loud, too small, too inconvenient. She would leave little things in my place: a toothbrush, a pair of shoes, a jacket, then more clothes, then a drawer. She started talking about how much sense it would make for us to share expenses, how my commute was shorter, how it would save her money if she moved in. It had been barely 2 months. I asked about her job search. She said the market was slow, that she was focusing on networking. But most days she was at my place watching shows or scrolling on her phone while I worked. One evening I came home early and found her on my laptop. She said she was just checking something quickly. Later that night, I noticed she had been looking up average salaries in my field, comparing cities, calculating potential savings if two incomes combined. I felt this creeping realization that I had not been chosen for who I was, but for what I represented. I confronted her about what her dad had said. She exploded, accused me of siding with them, said I did not understand how hard it was to cut off toxic family members. But now that I had seen them, the word toxic did not fit. They seemed frustrated, yes, but not cruel, not political extremists, just tired of bankrolling your life. I started pulling back, spending more time out with friends, not answering every text immediately. She noticed instantly. Her messages shifted from playful to anxious, asking if I still cared, asking if I was pulling away. One night she suggested we look at bigger apartments together, said it was the next logical step. I felt my chest tighten. It felt like being fast-forwarded into a future I had not agreed to. I told her I needed space. She cried, said I was just like her parents, abandoning her when things got uncomfortable. But it did not feel like abandonment. It felt like self-preservation. We broke up a few days later in my living room. She packed her things slowly, dramatically, kept pausing like she expected me to change my mind. I did not. After she left, I noticed how quiet the apartment felt. Not empty, just calm. A week later, I heard from a mutual friend that she was already seeing someone new, a guy who owned his own place downtown. Apparently, she had been spending nights there too. That confirmed everything. Sometimes I think about that afternoon in her parents' house, the framed photos, the way her mom looked confused more than angry. It made me realize how easy it is to craft a narrative that makes you the victim and everyone else the villain. I do not know what she told the next guy about her family. Maybe the same story, maybe a slightly edited version. All I know is that for a while I almost let myself become her next safety net, and that thought still makes my stomach twist. I found out about Kevin on a random Wednesday at 1:14 in the morning because I could not sleep and decided to Google my own name. That is how it started. Not because I was suspicious. Not because we had fought. Just because insomnia makes you do weird stuff. We had been dating for 2 months. 2 normal, steady months. Nothing dramatic. We met at a coffee shop after matching on an app, and he had this calm energy that made me feel safe. He worked in marketing or simple clothes, talked about wanting something serious. He said he was tired of games. I believed him. Our dates were low-key. Walks through the park. Late dinners at places that were not too loud. Nights at my place watching movies in the living room. He would bring dessert sometimes, always something thoughtful like my favorite ice cream flavor. He seemed observant, attentive in a quiet way. If you had asked me that week how things were going, I would have said stable, good and promising. That night, I was lying in bed scrolling through old emails when I randomly typed my name into a search bar. I do not even know why. Boredom, maybe. The first few results were normal. Social media. An old school article. Then I saw a link to some forum I had never heard of. The title included a city name and something about app dating. I clicked it without thinking. The page loaded with this plain, ugly layout. Black text. White background. Threads stacked on top of each other. I started scrolling lazily until I saw something that made my chest tighten. A screenshot of a conversation that looked familiar. I clicked it. It was me. Not my name, but my messages. Word for word. A screenshot of the first time I had told Kevin about my job. Another screenshot of a joke I had made about hating pineapple on pizza. There were timestamps visible. Cropped but recognizable. Under the screenshots was a paragraph written by someone using a username that I instantly knew was his. It was a nickname he used on other platforms. Same numbers at the end. He had written a breakdown of me, rating my looks, rating my career, reading my likelihood of relocating for a partner, reading how emotionally responsive I seemed. There was a scale from 1 to 10. I felt I was outside my body reading it. He described me as high potential but slightly guarded, said with the right pressure and future planning talk, I would probably consider moving within 6 months, said my attachment style seemed adaptable. Other men had replied, analyzing, suggesting strategies, debating whether my job could be leveraged in another city. One of them asked if I had mentioned wanting kids. Kevin responded that I had not, but that he would test that topic soon. My hands were shaking so badly I had to put my phone down. I scrolled further and realized there were multiple threads. Not just about me, about other women too. Screenshots of their faces blurred slightly, but recognizable if you knew them. Ratings, commentary, predictions about who would commit fastest, who would split bills easily, who seemed insecure enough to push boundaries with. It was like reading a group project on how to manipulate real people. I did not sleep that night. I stayed up reading everything. Some posts dated back over a year. Kevin had been active for a long time. This was not new. This was routine. The next morning, he texted me good morning with a heart emoji. I stared at the message for a full minute before responding normally. I needed time to think. We had plans to meet that evening at his place. He lived across town in a modern apartment building with a roofed-up terrace. I had been there a few times already. I remember driving there feeling like I was walking into a scene I had already watched once. He greeted me the same way as always. Hug, kiss on the cheek, casual smile. I kept looking at him, wondering how someone could sit across from me on my couch, ask about my childhood, talk about long-term plans, and then go home and upload my private messages to a group of strangers. We ate dinner. He talked about a work project. I nodded. My brain was loud, but my face stayed calm. After we finished eating, I told him I needed to ask something. He looked slightly confused, but not worried. I asked if he was part of any online forums about dating. The shift in his expression was tiny but obvious, a flicker. Then he smiled and said he used to read some stuff, but nothing serious. I told him I had seen the screenshots. Silence. He did not deny it. Not fully. He leaned back and exhaled like he had been caught doing something mildly embarrassing instead of deeply violating. He said it was just a place where guys vented, that everyone exaggerated online, that it was not personal. He said it was data, patterns, that he liked analyzing behavior. Data. That word made my skin crawl. I asked why he had posted our messages without telling me. He said it was anonymous, that no one knew it was me, that it was harmless discussion. I told him it did not feel harmless to me. He tried to explain the ranking system like it was some kind of hobby, said they rated compatibility and long-term potential to avoid wasting time, said it helped them identify red flags. I asked what my red flags were. He hesitated, then said my independence might make relocation harder, but that he believed he could navigate that. Navigate. Like I was a puzzle. I felt this wave of anger rise up, not loud, not explosive, just steady and heavy. I told him he had no right to treat me like a case study. He responded by saying I was overreacting, that most women would appreciate a man who thought ahead about compatibility. I almost laughed at that. Almost. I left his apartment without raising my voice. I just grabbed my bag and walked out. In the elevator, my reflection looked calm, but my chest felt tight. Over the next few days, he texted multiple times. Long messages about how misunderstood he felt. How the forum was just a way to share dating struggles. How he never meant to hurt me. I did not respond. Instead, I went back to the forum and read more threads. I found posts about me after our last few dates. He had updated my ranking, said emotional investment increasing, said potential relocation probability higher after recent conversations. I felt sick realizing that even our deeper talks had been logged somewhere like field notes. I reported the forum to the app we had met on. I sent screenshots. I do not know if anything happened. The forum stayed up for weeks after. What messed with me most was how normal he had seemed. No obvious red flags. No strange behavior. He had held my hand in public, introduced me to a coworker once, talked about meeting my friends. It made me question how many other people are secretly documenting interactions like they are part of some strategy game. I started being more careful about what I shared with anyone new, not guarded in a dramatic way, just aware, aware that screenshots are easy, that private messages are not really private. About a month later, a friend sent me a link to a post on that same forum. Kevin had started seeing someone new. There were fresh screenshots, fresh ratings, the pattern repeating. I felt this strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that it was no longer me. Sadness that someone else had no idea. I blocked his number and deleted our photos. I did not confront him again. There was nothing left to say. Sometimes I think about that scale from 1 to 10 and how casually he had reduced me to numbers. As if my personality could be graphed. As if my future could be predicted like a trend line. The last time I saw him was from across the street about 2 months later. He was walking with a woman I did not recognize. He looked relaxed, normal, like someone you would trust without thinking twice. I kept walking. I used to think the worst kind of liar was someone who took your money or cheated on you. I did not realize there was a different kind. The kind who takes your words. The kind who listens carefully, nods at the right moments, makes you feel heard, and then quietly repackages your life into something that benefits him. I met Brandon at a community panel about housing rights. I almost did not go. It was raining and I had just finished work and my hair looked bad, but I forced myself out of the apartment because I was tired of going straight home every night. The event was in this old brick building downtown with folding chairs and weak coffee in paper cups. Brandon was one of the speakers. He talked confidently about social justice, about amplifying marginalized voices, about ethical storytelling. He used phrases like accountability and platform responsibility. People nodded along. I nodded too. He seemed thoughtful, articulate, passionate in a way that felt grounded. After the panel, he came up to me because I had asked a question during the Q&A. He said he liked how I framed it. We ended up talking at the snack table for almost an hour. He asked about my background, my work, why I cared about the issues being discussed. He listened closely, like he was cataloging everything but in a warm way, not a creepy way. We exchanged numbers. It felt organic, not forced. Our first date was at a small vegetarian restaurant near where I live. He paid without making a big deal about it. We talked about activism, about burnout, about how easy it is for movements to get diluted once they get popular. He said he wrote essays sometimes, opinion pieces. He said he tried to highlight stories that mainstream outlets ignored. I remember feeling impressed, not in a starstruck way, just in this guy seems to care kind of way. Over the next few weeks, we saw each other regularly, sometimes at protests, sometimes just grabbing coffee. He would ask deep questions about my past, about moments when I felt overlooked or dismissed, about times I had struggled at work, about my family and how politics shaped our dinner table conversations when I was younger. I am not usually someone who opens up fast, but he had the steady eye contact that made it easy. He never interrupted. He would summarize what I said in a way that made me feel understood, like he was carefully holding my stories. One night, sitting on my couch in the living room, I told him about a situation at my old job where a supervisor had taken credit for my project. How it had made me question myself for months. He asked thoughtful follow-up questions. How did it affect my confidence? What did it teach me about power dynamics? It felt therapeutic almost. He said stories like that deserved to be told. A few weeks later, he sent me a link to an article he had written. He sounded proud, said it had just been published on a mid-sized online platform. I clicked it while sitting at my desk during lunch break. The headline was bold and dramatic, something about invisible labor and stolen recognition. As I started reading, my stomach slowly tightened. The opening paragraph described a young professional who had poured months into a project only to have it claimed by a superior. The details were specific, not identical to what I had told him, but close enough that I recognized my own sentences woven into it. Phrases I had used, metaphors I had casually said. Even the timeline matched. He had changed small things, different industry, slightly altered setting, but the core was mine. My heart started pounding. I kept reading. Halfway through the article, there was another section about family dinners filled with political tension, about learning to self-censor at a young age. Again, the structure mirrored what I had told him on our second date. There was no credit, no mention that these were composite stories. The article was written in first person, as if he had lived all of it. I felt dizzy sitting there at my desk. I texted him asking if the piece was based on our conversations. He replied quickly, Said it was inspired by many discussions. Said he blended narratives to protect privacy. Protect privacy. That word felt hollow. I asked why he had not told me he was using my stories. He said he assumed I would be proud, that the point of activism was to elevate experiences. That anonymity kept it safe. But he was the one being elevated. His name was on the byline, his photo at the top. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention. I read his older articles. Themes started to look familiar. Bits of conversations we had about housing insecurity, about student loans, about workplace bias, all shaped into compelling essays with his voice narrating them. I began to wonder how many other women had sat across from him, sharing personal details, believing they were being heard, only to see their lives reframed as his content. I confronted him in person a week later at a cafe near his apartment. I did not yell. I just asked directly if he had ever asked permission from anyone whose stories he used. He said asking would complicate things, that consent forms and acknowledgments would scare people, that the message mattered more than the individual source. That sentence changed everything for me. The message mattered more than the individual source. I realized in that moment that I was not a partner to him. I was material, raw input. He tried to explain that he was giving voice to important issues, that stories are collective, that ownership is fluid in movements. He said I was focusing on ego instead of impact. Ego. I had never felt smaller. After that conversation, I went home and searched my own phrases online. It sounds dramatic, but I needed to know. I typed in specific lines I remembered saying. A few popped up in different articles under his name. Slightly altered, but recognizable. I felt exposed. Not because my identity was revealed, but because my vulnerability had been harvested. I sent emails to 2 platforms that had published his work. I explained that my personal experiences had been used without consent. One responded politely saying they would look into it. I never heard back. Brandon texted me long paragraphs about misunderstanding and intention, about how he valued me, about how this conflict was proof that we both cared deeply about ethics. I stopped responding. A month later, I saw him speak at another event in the same brick building where we had met. I did not go inside. I stood across the street for a minute watching people file in, listening to him through the open door as he talked about responsible storytelling. I felt this mix of anger and disbelief. How easy it was for him to say the right things. How hard it was for anyone to see the gap between his public persona and private behavior. I never got an apology that felt real. Just explanations, justifications, reframing. Now, whenever someone asks deep questions too early, I pause. Not because I do not want to connect, but because I know how easily connection can be converted into currency for someone else. The last article he published that I read months later had a line that sounded almost exactly like something I once told him on my couch. This time, I did not feel dizzy, just tired. I closed the tab and moved on. I found out about Ethan in the least dramatic way possible. No anonymous messages, no late-night confession, just a boring public website and a search bar. We met on a dating app during a week when I had promised myself I would only match with men who looked emotionally stable. That was my new rule. No flashy bios, no mysterious profiles. Ethan's page was simple. One photo in a blue button-down shirt, one hiking picture, one with a dog that he claimed was his sister's. His bio said recently divorced, looking for something real and steady. Recently divorced made me pause, but he addressed it immediately in our first conversation. Said the marriage had ended quietly. No drama. No kids. They had grown apart. He said he valued honesty more than anything now. We met at a wine bar near where I live. He was on time. He stood up when I walked in. Small gestures that felt intentional. He asked about my work and actually listened. He talked about therapy like it was normal. Said he had learned a lot from his divorce. Said it had forced him to reflect. He seemed grounded. Not bitter. Not chaotic. Just calm. Over the next few weeks, we fell into a comfortable rhythm. Dinners at his place. Movie nights at mine in the living room. Lazy Sunday mornings with coffee and the news playing quietly in the background. He talked about wanting stability. About not rushing, but also not wasting time. He told me his ex-wife had been unstable toward the end, that she struggled with jealousy and mood swings. He said he tried to support her, but eventually realized he could not fix someone who did not want help. The way he framed it made him sound patient, compassionate. I believe him. About 2 months in, he started staying over more often. He kept a toothbrush at my place, left a sweater on my chair. Nothing extreme, just gradual merging. One night, we were lying in bed, and he mentioned he had to go downtown the next day to file some paperwork related to finalizing loose ends from the divorce. I did not think much of it. Legal stuff takes time. The next afternoon, I was at work and randomly thought about something he had said weeks earlier. He had mentioned the divorce was finalized last year, but now there was paperwork again. The details stuck in my head in a small, annoying way. During my lunch break, out of curiosity more than suspicion, I searched the county public records site. I had used it once before to look up property information. It was clunky and outdated. I typed in his full name. A few results popped up. Property tax records, a traffic ticket from years ago, then a marriage license, dated 6 months ago. My brain stalled. I clicked it thinking maybe it was old and just recently uploaded, but the date was clear. Issued half a year ago, spouse name listed underneath. Not his ex-wife's name. Someone else. I stared at the screen until my lunch break ended. I felt cold even though the office was warm. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a clerical error. Maybe someone with the same name, but the birth date matched. The middle initial matched. I waited until that evening when he came over. I tried to act normal, but my thoughts were racing. After dinner, while we were sitting on the couch in the living room, I asked casually how the divorce paperwork was going. He said it was almost fully wrapped up, just technicalities. I looked at him and asked if he had remarried. The silence was immediate. He did not look shocked. He looked calculating, like he was deciding which version of the truth to offer. He said it was complicated. Complicated. He admitted that he had gotten legally remarried earlier that year, but insisted it was not what it sounded like. He said the relationship was unstable, that he and his current wife were essentially separated in everything but paperwork, that he had been planning to leave but needed to figure out finances first. I felt like the air had thickened. I asked if she knew about me. He said she thought he was trying to move on from an unstable ex, that he had framed me as someone he was casually seeing while he sorted things out. Casually seeing. He had told me we were building something intentional. I asked if she believed they were still married. He said technically yes, but emotionally no. Every answer felt like it was sliding sideways instead of forward. I asked why his profile said divorced. He said saying separated scared people off. That divorced sounded cleaner. Cleaner. I stood up because sitting felt impossible. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. He followed me into the kitchen, talking quickly now, saying he did not want to lose me, saying his marriage was a mistake he was trying to correct, saying he had not told me because he did not want to complicate something that felt good. I asked how long he had been planning to tell me. He did not have a clear answer. Over the next hour, more details spilled out. They had married quickly after a short relationship. There had been financial entanglements, shared accounts, a lease. He said she was emotionally volatile and that he felt trapped. Trapped, but still married. I asked if she knew he was spending nights at my place. He said she believed he was staying with friends. Friends. I felt this sharp wave of humiliation. Not because of her. Because of him. Because I had believed I was stepping into something stable with a man who valued honesty. He kept repeating that he was trying to escape an unhealthy situation, that I was different, that he saw a future with me once things were sorted. Once things were sorted. I told him to leave. He tried to argue at first, then shifted to pleading, said he needed time, said everything was messy but fixable. I did not yell. I just told him to go. After he left, I sat on the couch staring at the door. My apartment felt unfamiliar suddenly, like the space had been contaminated by secrets. The next day, I did something I never thought I would do. I looked up his wife's name on social media. Her profile was public. Photos from 3 months ago showed them together at a family event, smiling, arms around each other. There was no sign of separation. I did not message her. I considered it for hours, but in the end, I chose not to insert myself further. He texted repeatedly over the next week, long explanations, promises that he was filing for divorce immediately, screenshots of drafted emails to lawyers. He said he had told her the truth. I did not respond. A week later, he sent a message saying she had reacted badly and was accusing him of cheating. He said she was unstable just like his first ex. The pattern was obvious now. Everyone else unstable and reasonable. I blocked his number after that. Months later, out of curiosity, I checked the public records site again. A divorce filing had appeared, dated shortly after our confrontation. I do not know if it was because of me or because she found out another way. I do not know if they are still legally married now. What I do know is that for 2 months, I was unknowingly dating a married man who built an entire narrative about being free and ready for something real. Sometimes I think about the quietness of how I found out. Just a website. Just a line of text. No dramatic reveal. Just a simple record that contradicted everything he had told me. The last message he sent before I blocked him said he hoped one day I would understand that timing is complicated. I did not reply. I knew something was off with Caleb the first time he sent me a 3-paragraph apology at 2-3 in the morning for replying late. Not because the apology was bad. It was actually too good. It had structure. It had emotional awareness. It even had a closing sentence that tied back to something I had mentioned earlier that week. Who writes like that at 2-3 in the morning after a regular Tuesday? But at the time, I took it as a green flag. I had been complaining to my friends for years about men who could barely text a full sentence. Caleb sent essays, thoughtful ones. He used words like accountability and reflection. He referenced attachment styles casually. He would summarize my feelings back to me in a way that sounded like he had been reading psychology books in his spare time. We matched on an app on a random Saturday. His profile said he valued honesty above all else. There were pictures of him hiking, one with his niece, one sitting at a desk with a laptop open like he was deep in thought. He worked in finance remotely, lived alone, no drama. Our first week of messaging felt intense in a good way. He would respond within minutes with detailed replies. If I mentioned having a stressful day, he would send back paragraphs about emotional resilience and how important it was for partners to create safe spaces for each other. He talked about communication like it was sacred. We met in person after 10 days of nonstop texting at a small restaurant downtown. He was polite, well-dressed, but quieter than I expected. He listened more than he talked. When I asked deeper questions, his answers were shorter than his texts. I told myself he was just better at writing than speaking. After our third date, he sent me a long message about how he appreciated the emotional depth of our connection. It felt slightly fast, but also flattering. He wrote about how rare it was to find someone aligned with his values. He even included a line about how he did not want to rush, but also did not want to undercommunicate his feelings. I read it twice, then 3 times. The thing is, in person, he was not that expressive. He was kind, yes. Attentive, yes, but not poetic, not layered. His words in real life were simple, sometimes awkward. One night, he came over to my place. We were sitting in the living room watching a movie when he got a text and his phone lit up. I was not snooping. It just caught my eye because the notification banner looked strange. It said something like response generated. I did not say anything then. Later that night, after he left, he sent me another long message about how grateful he was for the evening. It had the same polished tone, same rhythm, same careful phrasing. I started noticing patterns, certain phrases repeated in slightly different contexts, like emotionally attuned partnership, like secure foundation, like aligned long-term vision. It was like he had vocabulary bank he pulled from. A week later, we had a minor disagreement. Nothing major. I had mentioned that sometimes he felt more present over text than in person. He nodded and said he would reflect on that. 2 hours later, I received a 5-paragraph message breaking down his communication style. It was organized into sections: acknowledgement, accountability, action plan. It almost looked formatted. That was the moment something clicked. I copied one of the sentences and pasted it into a search engine. Nothing specific came up. Then I added the word "a" at the end. Several results appeared. Articles about new apps that help generate emotionally intelligent messages. Examples of relationship texts created by artificial intelligence. One of the sample messages looked eerily similar to what he had sent me days earlier. My stomach dropped. I decided not to jump to conclusions. I'd waited. The next time he sent a long message, I copied a full paragraph and pasted it into a different tool that detects generated text. The result said high probability of AI-generated content. I felt embarrassed for even doing that, like I was paranoid. But the patterns were too consistent. I invited him over a few nights later. I wanted to test something. While we were sitting at the kitchen table, I told him I felt insecure about something random and watched his reaction closely. In person, he stumbled. He gave a short, vague reassurance. Nothing like the eloquent responses he usually sent later. After he left, right on schedule, my phone buzzed. Another perfectly crafted message. It referenced my insecurity in precise language. It validated me in 3 distinct ways. It even ended with a forward-looking statement about growth. I stared at it for a long time before replying. Instead of responding emotionally, I asked directly if he ever used any tools to help write his messages. There was a long pause before he answered. Finally, he admitted that he sometimes used an app to help him articulate feelings. He said he struggled to find the right words in real time, that the tool helped him organize his thoughts, that the feelings were still his, even if the phrasing was assisted. I asked how often. He said almost every time he sent something long. Almost every time. That meant the apology at 2, 3 in the morning, the romantic confessions, the deep reflections about our future, all filtered through an algorithm. I felt this strange mix of anger and sadness, not because he used technology, but because I had been connecting to a version of him that was curated by software. I asked why he did not tell me from the start. He said he was embarrassed, that he knew women valued emotional intelligence and he did not want to seem lacking. He said the app just helped him show his best self. Best self. But I wanted his real self, even if it was clumsy, even if it was imperfect. We talked for over an hour that night, in person, no phones, without the polished structure. His thoughts were scattered. He repeated himself. He struggled to explain what he felt beyond basic statements. It was not that he did not care. It was that he had outsourced the most intimate part of our connection. I asked him to send me a message without using the app. Just one. Later that week he did. It was short. Awkward. Missing the smooth transitions I had grown used to, but it felt real. For a second, I thought maybe we could adjust. Maybe he could unlearn the habit. But the next time we had a serious conversation, he slipped back into the old pattern. Another structured essay. Another perfectly balanced apology. I realized it was not just about convenience. It was about image. He liked the version of himself the app created. The emotionally fluent, hyper-aware partner. I did not want to date a performance. We ended things quietly. No dramatic fight. Just a conversation where I told him I needed authenticity more than articulation. He said he understood. And for once, the message he sent afterward was short. Simple. Clearly written by him. Sometimes I think about how easy it is now to manufacture emotional depth, to generate the right words without actually embodying them. What bothered me most was not that he used technology. It was that I had fallen for the version of him that did not fully exist. The last message he sent me said he was going to try communicating without assistance moving forward. It was imperfect, slightly repetitive, but human. I did not respond. I used to be very clear on one thing. I did not want kids. Not now, not later, not secretly in 5 years after someone convinced me I would change my mind. I had said it so many times it felt like part of my identity. So when I matched with Jordan and his profile said he eventually wanted a family, I almost swiped past him. But his bio also said he respected different life paths, and his smile looked easy. He was a teacher. Middle school history. There was something steady about that. Grounded. We started talking on a random Monday night. His messages were playful but thoughtful. He asked real questions. He talked about his students in a way that made it clear he cared. Not in a dramatic hero way, just in a normal, consistent way. I brought up the kids thing early. I did not want confusion later. I told him directly that I did not see myself as a parent, that I liked my independence, that I enjoyed my quiet apartment and spontaneous weekends. He replied that he appreciated honesty, that while he had always imagined having children, he believed connection mattered more than a checklist. He said he was open to seeing where things went. That felt mature. We met for the first time at a small outdoor market near where I live. He showed up wearing a slightly wrinkled button-down shirt and sneakers. He looked exactly like his photos. We walked around for hours. He pointed out random historical facts about the old buildings nearby. I teased him about being a walking documentary. It felt easy. Over the next month, we saw each other often. Dinners at casual places, movie nights in my living room, long walks after work. He would talk about his students' essays, about how he wanted to make learning meaningful. He seemed patient, calm, the opposite of chaotic. Once in a while, the topic of children would come up indirectly. He would mention how one of his friends just had a baby, or how he liked the idea of coaching a little league team someday. But he never pushed me, never argued. I started to relax. One evening, about 6 weeks in, we were sitting on my balcony watching the sun go down. The conversation drifted toward the future. Careers, travel, where we might want to live long term. He said he could picture himself in a house with a yard one day, somewhere quiet. He described it casually, not intense, just thoughtful. I reminded him gently that my vision did not include kids running around that yard. He smiled and said sometimes people surprise themselves. That sentence lingered. I asked what he meant. He shrugged, said he had seen plenty of friends swear they did not want children and then change their minds after meeting the right person. I laughed it off at the time, but something in his tone felt certain. A few weeks later, I met some of his friends at a barbecue. They were welcoming, easy to talk to. At one point, one of them made a joke about how Jordan had always wanted to be a dad since college, how he used to talk about it constantly. I looked at him. He smiled but did not correct it. On the drive home, I asked him if he still felt strongly about having kids. He said he believed in growth, that people evolve, that love can reshape priorities. I started feeling like he was not fully hearing me, like my no was being translated into maybe later. The real shift happened 2 months in. We were at his apartment one evening sitting on his couch. He had been quiet most of the night. Finally, he said he had something to admit. He told me he had intentionally been dating women who said they did not want kids. I blinked, thinking I had misheard. He explained that he believed women who were unsure or opposed to children were often just reacting to societal pressure or fear. He said he thought with the right partner and stable environment, many would reconsider. I felt my chest tighten. He said he saw it as patience, as long-term vision, not manipulation. I asked if he thought I would change my mind. He did not hesitate. He said yes. Not in a cruel way, not laughing, just calm, confident. He said he could see how independent I was, how thoughtful. He said he believed once I felt secure enough, I would want to build something bigger. I felt like he had quietly been planning a future for me that I had already rejected. I asked why he had not just dated women who wanted kids from the start. He said those women often had timelines, pressure, expectations. He preferred starting with someone open-minded. Open-minded. I reminded him I had been clear, that I was not undecided. I had thought about it deeply for years. He nodded but said people change. It felt like he was waiting me out. Over the next few days, I started replaying past conversations. The subtle comments. The way he would linger on baby photos longer than necessary. The way he once joked about how good I would be at explaining history to a child. None of it had seemed aggressive, but now it felt strategic. I confronted him again a week later, asked directly if he would be satisfied never having children. He paused this time. He said he would struggle with that. I asked why he had told me connection mattered more than a checklist. He said he believed it did, but he also believed love could expand what someone thought they wanted. I felt tired suddenly. Not angry, just tired. It was not that he was evil. He was not. He was kind in many ways. Attentive. Generous. But he had been dating me with an unspoken agenda. He had not respected my boundary as final. He had seen it as a temporary phase. We sat in silence for a while in his living room. I could tell he thought I was overreacting, that in 5 years maybe I would thank him. That assumption hurt more than an argument would have. I told him I did not want to be with someone who viewed my life choices as flexible targets to be adjusted. He said he thought relationships were about influence. Influence. That word sealed it. We ended things that night, not with shouting, just with a quiet understanding that we were building toward different futures. A few months later, I heard through a mutual friend that he was dating someone new, a woman who also said she did not want kids. I felt a strange mix of frustration and resignation. Sometimes I wonder if he ever finds someone who genuinely shares his vision, or if he keeps trying to gently steer women toward the future he already designed. The last time I saw him was at the grocery store near where I live. He was in the produce section. We nodded politely. Small smiles. Nothing more. I walked away feeling certain about one thing. No matter how kind someone seems, if they believe your no is temporary, they are not actually listening. If you'd asked me to describe my type at that point, I would have said someone rebuilding, someone honest about their past, someone who had been through something and come out clearer. That is exactly how Luke presented himself. His profile said he was in recovery, rebuilding his life step by step. He wrote about accountability, second chances, discipline. There was a photo of him at the gym, one at a volunteer event handing out food, one simple headshot in natural light. He looked steady, not flashy, grounded. We matched on a Thursday night. His first message was thoughtful, but not over the top. He said he appreciated that my profile mentioned financial independence and stability, that those values mattered to him too. I liked that. It felt mature. We talked for a week before meeting. During that time, he was open about having made mistakes in his past. He said he had struggled with gambling years ago, that he had taken responsibility and entered a program, that he was focused on building a stable future now. I respected the honesty. People have histories. What mattered to me was growth. We met at a coffee shop near where I live. He showed up early, stood when I walked in. He had this calm, almost measured way of speaking. He maintained eye contact. He listened closely. He told me more about his recovery, about the routines he had built, about cutting off old influences. He said he believed financial transparency was crucial in relationships because money had once been his downfall. That sentence sounded healthy at the time. Our first few dates were simple. Walks in the park. Dinners at mid-range restaurants. He always insisted on paying but never in a showy way. He would say he wanted to demonstrate reliability. About 3 weeks in, his questions started shifting slightly. At first it was small. He asked if I preferred renting or owning. I said I was renting but saving to maybe buy someday. He asked if I was contributing to retirement accounts. I laughed and said yes, like most adults. Then he asked what my credit score was. I thought he was joking. I laughed again. He did not. He said he believed couples should be open about financial health early on to avoid surprises later. He framed it like responsibility. I told him that felt a little premature. He nodded and said he understood, but added that he had learned the hard way how important financial compatibility was. I brushed it off. A few days later, he asked how much student loan debt I had left. I told him I was not comfortable sharing exact numbers yet. He smiled and said he respected boundaries. But the pattern continued. He would casually bring up topics like joint accounts, or how banks evaluate risk, or how lenders look at combined income. It felt like he was mapping something. One night, while we were sitting in my living room watching a show, he mentioned that he had been under financial guardianship for a period of time after his gambling issues. He said a court had assigned oversight to ensure he did not relapse financially. I was surprised, but appreciated the transparency. Then he added that it had technically ended, but there were still some restrictions tied to old cases. Old cases? I asked what that meant. He said there had been fraud claims filed against him years ago, that he had signed documents he did not fully understand at the time, that everything was resolved, but the legal residue lingered. Legal residue lingered. That phrase stuck with me. A week later, out of curiosity and maybe a growing unease, I searched his name online. Nothing dramatic came up at first. Then I found a legal database listing. Multiple civil cases related to financial misconduct, not ancient history, some only a few years old. My stomach dropped. I kept digging and found a court document mentioning ongoing financial supervision due to repeated fraudulent activity. Repeated. He had framed it as a past mistake. Singular. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the screen for a long time. The next time we met, I asked him directly about the cases. He did not deny them. He just reframed them. He said the system had been harsh, that he had been young and desperate, that he had trusted the wrong people, that some of the claims were exaggerated. He spoke calmly, like he had practiced this explanation before. I asked why he was still under any form of restriction if everything was resolved. He said the legal system moves slowly. Then he pivoted and asked again about my financial situation. This time more pointed, whether I had ever missed payments, whether my credit utilization was low. It clicked then. His interest in my finances was not about compatibility. It was about access. I asked him why my credit score mattered so much to him. He said in a long-term partnership, shared resources are inevitable, that he wanted to ensure we would not face obstacles if we applied for something together in the future. Apply for something together. We had been dating barely 6 weeks. I started noticing other small things. He would comment on the limits of my credit cards when I mentioned them casually. He once asked if I had ever co-signed for anyone. He joked about how good my financial habits were compared to his past self. Joked. One evening, he suggested we look into investment opportunities together. Said he had been researching a property deal that required a co-signer with strong credit. He said he would never pressure me, but it could be mutually beneficial. There it was. The mask slipped just enough. I asked if he was legally allowed to sign major financial documents on his own. He hesitated. He said technically yes, but with oversight. Oversight. I felt this heavy realization settle in. He was not rebuilding alone. He was scouting. I confronted him fully that night, told him I had read the court documents, that I knew the guardianship was still active, that the fraud claims were not minor. His calm demeanor cracked slightly. He accused me of invading his privacy, of not trusting him. I told him trust requires consistency. He shifted tactics, said he had been honest about his recovery, that he could not change his past, that I was judging him unfairly. I asked why he kept circling back to my credit score. He said financial stability was attractive. Attractive. That word felt transactional. I realized then that he was not looking for partnership. He was looking for leverage. We ended things that night. He did not argue as much as I expected. He just looked disappointed, like a plan had fallen through. Afterward, I felt shaken. Not because I had lost something meaningful, but because I had almost underestimated the subtlety of his questions. It was not loud manipulation. It was careful, layered, disguised as responsibility. A few months later, I heard through someone that he had moved in quickly with another woman, that they were discussing buying property together. I felt a chill at that thought. Sometimes I think about how easily financial language can sound mature and forward-thinking, when it is actually probing for vulnerability. The last message he sent before I blocked him said he hoped I would eventually see that he was serious about building a future. I did not reply. I always thought it was kind of attractive when someone said they did not use social media. It sounded disciplined, private, mature, like they were above the noise. So when Andrew told me on our second date that he had no accounts anywhere, I took it as a green flag. He said he valued privacy, said he did not like broadcasting his life to strangers. He worked remotely in tech, freelancing for different startups, so it made sense that he would be careful about his digital footprint. That was the word he used, footprint. We matched on a quiet Sunday evening. His profile was minimal. 3 photos. Clean backgrounds. One in a coffee shop. One at a desk with dual monitors. One outside on a trail. His bio was short but confident. Said he built systems for a living and liked efficiency in all areas of life. Our first date was at a small rooftop bar downtown. He was charming in an understated way. He asked good questions, laughed at my jokes, talked about productivity tools and remote work like it was fascinating. I remember thinking he seemed organized, maybe even slightly rigid, but in a stable way. After a few weeks, we fell into a routine. He would come over to my place after work. We would cook together in my kitchen, then sit in the living room watching something random. He was affectionate, but not overly intense. Steady. One night, while we were cleaning up after dinner, I joked about taking a photo of us and posting it. He immediately stiffened. He said he preferred not to have his image online, that clients sometimes searched his name, and he liked to keep his personal life separate. I respected that. I even admired it. About a month in, he mentioned he had to attend a networking event for one of the companies he consulted for. He said he did not usually go to in-person events, but this one was important. He dressed slightly more formal than usual that evening. Button-down shirt, fitted jacket. The next day, while scrolling absent-mindedly during lunch, I saw a suggested post from someone I did not follow. It was a photo from that event. A group of people smiling, drinks in hand. Andrew was in the background, tagged by a woman whose name I did not recognize. I clicked her profile. It was public. As I scrolled, my stomach slowly tightened. There were multiple photos of Andrew, not just at networking events, at restaurants, at parks, in someone's apartment. In several of the photos, he was standing close to her, hand on her waist. In one, he was holding up her hand with a caption about celebrating milestones. The comments underneath included congratulations emojis, engagement jokes. My chest felt hollow. I kept scrolling. The photos went back months, even before we met. I tried to tell myself it could be old, maybe an ex, maybe the posts were outdated. But then I noticed something else. The timestamps were recent, some from just last week. In one photo, he was wearing the same shirt he had worn to my place 2 nights earlier. My hands started shaking. I clicked into his tagged photos further. There were multiple accounts tagging him, different women, different settings. Each account had curated images of him in romantic poses, dinners, weekend trips, captions hinting at something serious. None of the accounts were private. Yet he had told me he did not have social media. I felt dizzy sitting at my desk. That evening when he came over, I did not confront him immediately. I watched him move around my kitchen, casual, comfortable, like nothing was off. After dinner, while we were sitting in the living room, I asked again about his stance on social media. He repeated the same line. No accounts. No interest. I pulled out my phone and showed him one of the photos. The shift in his expression was instant. He did not look shocked. He looked annoyed. He said those accounts were not his, that other people sometimes tagged him without permission, that he could not control what others posted. I showed him another account, and another. Each one had a slightly different version of him. Different angle, different caption, but all recent. He sighed and admitted he had created a few private accounts under different names for professional reasons, that sometimes he allowed people to tag him for networking visibility. Allowed. I asked why some of the posts implied engagement. He said people exaggerate online. I opened one of the profiles fully and scrolled to a photo posted 2 weeks earlier. He was standing in what looked like a living room with string lights in the background. The caption said something about future plans. That was the same night he had told me he was working late. My throat felt tight. I asked how many women thought they were exclusive with him. He hesitated. Then he said he never explicitly promised exclusivity to anyone. Never explicitly promised. But he had talked to me about long-term compatibility, about future travel, about maybe moving in together if things progressed. None of it had been labeled, but it had been implied. I kept digging over the next few days. I found at least 4 separate accounts where he appeared regularly, each one crafted slightly differently. In one, he was the supportive boyfriend. In another, the ambitious partner. In another, the low-key, almost fiancé. The photos were carefully edited, lighting adjusted, backgrounds curated. It was like he was maintaining parallel narratives. I confronted him again 2 days later, this time with screenshots. He grew defensive. Said modern dating was fluid. Said until there was a defined conversation, everyone was free. I asked why he lied about not having social media. He said privacy. Privacy. But this was not privacy, it was strategy. I realized he had been using these accounts to build an image, not just for the women involved, but for colleagues too, to appear stable, desirable, settled. In one comment thread under a photo, someone from his industry had congratulated him on his engagement. He replied with a smile emoji but never corrected it. He was collecting credibility through illusion. The thought made my skin crawl. I ended things that week. He tried to downplay it, said I was overreacting to optics, said none of the relationships were serious. But seriousness is not measured by labels alone. After we broke up, I noticed my own photo appear on one of the accounts briefly. A cropped image from a dinner we had gone to. The caption hinted at something ongoing. I felt exposed. I messaged the account demanding it be removed. It disappeared within an hour. That was the last time we communicated. Months later, I checked one of the profiles out of curiosity. New photos, new woman, similar captions, similar narrative. He was still maintaining the illusion. Sometimes I think about how carefully he had constructed his image, how he had insisted on digital invisibility while quietly orchestrating multiple visible stories. The last thing he ever said to me was that in tech, you learn to manage parallel systems. I guess I was just one of them. I do not usually argue with strangers on the internet, and I definitely do not expect to see my own face clipped into a thumbnail with bold text over it. But that is exactly how this one ended. When I first matched with Nathan, politics barely came up. His profile said politically neutral, curious about different perspectives, open-minded. There were pictures of him in a lake, one in a bookstore, one smiling awkwardly at what looked like a family gathering. Nothing extreme, nothing loud. We started talking on a Tuesday night. He asked about my job, my hobbies, where I like to travel. Normal stuff. Eventually, the conversation drifted toward current events because it was impossible to avoid at the time. He responded thoughtfully but vaguely. He would say things like, I see both sides, or I think nuance gets lost online. That sounded reasonable. We met for the first time in a casual taco place near where I live. He was taller than I expected. Soft-spoken. He listened carefully and would tilt his head slightly when I explained something. He did not interrupt. He would ask follow-up questions in a calm tone. It felt mature. On our second date, the topic of politics came up more directly. I mentioned something about a recent policy change and how frustrated I felt about it. He asked me to explain why. Not in a confrontational way, just curious. I went into detail, he nodded, occasionally asked me to clarify. The conversation was intense, but not heated, at least not from my side. Afterward, he said he appreciated that I could articulate my views clearly, that too many people just repeat headlines. I took it as a compliment. Over the next few weeks, our dates often drifted into debates. Not shouting matches, structured discussions. He would play devil's advocate frequently, question my assumptions, ask for evidence. I enjoy a good discussion, so at first it was stimulating. I felt challenged in a healthy way. But then I started noticing a pattern. He would steer conversations toward controversial topics deliberately. If we were talking about travel, he would somehow connect it back to immigration. If we were talking about work, he would pivot to economic systems. It felt less organic and more guided. One evening, while we were sitting in my living room, he placed his phone face down on the coffee table. It was slightly angled toward us. I did not think much of it at the time. The conversation that night turned into a heated debate about education policy. I got animated. I tend to use my hands when I talk. He remained calm, asking pointed questions. A few days later, my friend sent me a link with no context. Just this is you, right? I clicked it. It was a video on a debate channel. The thumbnail showed a blurred image of me mid-gesture with bold text that said liberal meltdown. My heart dropped. I opened the video. It was a 10-minute clip of me and Nathan sitting in my living room. The camera angle matched where his phone had been placed. My voice filled the room as I watched myself argue passionately about policy. He had edited it carefully, cut out parts where I made balanced points, zoomed in on moments where my voice rose slightly, added captions framing my statements as extreme. My hands started shaking. The channel had thousands of subscribers. The comments were brutal. People dissecting my expressions, mocking my tone, calling me dramatic. I felt exposed in a way I cannot fully describe. I scrolled down and saw other videos on his channel. Different women, different settings, similar format. Thumbnails with phrases like woke date destroyed or neutral guy challenges radical view. Neutral guy. I realized then that his neutrality had been branding. I called him immediately. He did not answer. I texted asking what the hell this was. He replied hours later saying he meant to tell me about the channel, that it was a side project, that he believed in open discourse. Open discourse does not involve secretly recording someone in their own home. I confronted him in person the next day at a park. I did not want him in my apartment again. He said he had been transparent about enjoying debate, that recording discussions allowed for broader conversation, that he blurred faces sometimes. I pointed out that my face was not blurred in the thumbnail, just slightly softened. He said controversy drives engagement. Engagement. I asked how much he was making off these videos. He admitted the channel was monetized, that ad revenue vary, but some videos earn a few $100s, sometimes more depending on views. He had turned our private conversations into content. I asked if the other women knew they were being recorded. He hesitated. That was answer enough. I demanded he take the video down immediately. He argued that it had already gained traction, that removing it would hurt the algorithm, that the discussion was valuable. Valuable. I told him if it was not removed within the hour, I would pursue legal action. For the first time since I met him, he looked genuinely unsettled. The video was taken down later that day, but screenshots had already circulated. Comments had already been written. I spent weeks anxious that someone from work would recognize my living room, that someone would connect the dots. I changed the layout of my space afterward, moved the couch, rearranged the coffee table. It felt strange but necessary. What bothered me most was how calculated it had been, the way he had guided conversations toward controversy, the strategic calmness, the phone placement. I went back and read old messages between us. He had once asked if I was comfortable being part of meaningful dialogue. At the time, I thought he meant emotionally. He meant publicly. A few weeks later, I saw another of his videos recommended online. A different woman this time, similar setup, similar framing. I considered commenting, exposing him, but part of me just wanted distance. He sent me one final message saying he hoped one day I would see the value in challenging ideas openly. I blocked him. Sometimes I think about how easily someone can hide ambition behind neutrality, how debate can become performance. The last image I have of him is from that park bench, calm, almost disappointed that I did not appreciate being part of his project. I never responded again. The first thing he ever told me about himself was that he was a widower, not in a dramatic way, not as a headline. It came up gently, almost carefully, like he had rehearsed how to say it without making it the center of everything. We matched on a rainy Thursday. I remember because I was sitting on my bed listening to the storm hit the windows when his profile popped up. He had kind eyes. That was my first thought. Kind eyes and a slightly tired smile. His bio was simple. Teacher, likes cooking. Lost his partner a few years ago, ready to try again. I hesitated before swiping right. Dating a widower felt heavy, like stepping into someone else's unfinished story. But there was something about the way he phrased it that felt honest. Not fishing for sympathy, just stating a fact. We started messaging, and he did not bring it up again immediately. We talked about normal things, favorite movies, where we grew up. He lived about 20 minutes from where I live. He taught at a local high school. He liked early morning runs. On our first date, we met at a small Italian restaurant tucked between two bigger stores. Candlelight, quiet music. He was polite, soft-spoken. He listened more than he talked. Halfway through dinner, he mentioned his late partner again. He said her name once. Said she had passed unexpectedly. Said it took him a long time to feel normal again. His voice wavered slightly when he said it. Not dramatically, just enough to feel real. I felt this immediate urge to be gentle with him. Over the next few weeks, he would reference her occasionally. Small things, like how she used to love a certain song, or how she hated spicy food. It never felt obsessive, just woven into his history. I admired what I thought was vulnerability. About a month in, he invited me to a small gathering at his friend's house. He said it was nothing big, just a few close people who had been part of his life during the hardest years. I agreed. It felt like a step forward. The house was cozy. Warm lighting. Framed photos on the walls. His friends greeted me kindly. There was an unspoken awareness in the room that I was stepping into something delicate. At one point, one of his friends asked me how Dylan had told me about the breakup. Breakup. The word hit strangely. I assumed it was a slip. Maybe they meant breakdown or something similar. Later that evening, another friend made a comment about how glad they were that Dylan was finally dating again after everything that happened with her. Again, the phrasing felt off. I tried to ignore it, but the discomfort lingered. A week later, curiosity got the best of me. I searched his partner's name online. I expected to find an obituary, a memorial page. Instead, I found a social media profile. Active. Recent photos. Recent posts. My chest tightened as I scrolled. There were pictures of her traveling, smiling, living. She was alive. I stared at the screen, waiting for my brain to catch up. I checked the dates. The posts were from months ago, even weeks ago. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I confronted him the next day. We met at a park halfway between our places. I held my phone in my hand the entire time. I asked him directly if his partner had passed away. He froze. For a split second, I saw panic in his eyes. Then he sighed and said it was complicated. Complicated again. He admitted she had not died, that they had separated 3 years ago, that she had left him. Left him. He said the breakup had felt like a death, that he had lost everything, that describing himself as a widower was easier than explaining the truth. Easier. I felt anger rise in a way I had not expected, not explosive, just sharp. I asked why he had let me believe someone had died. He said he never explicitly said she died, that people assume when they hear widower. I replayed our first date in my head, the careful tone, the trembling voice. He had absolutely intended for me to assume. He said saying she left made him look weak, made him look like the villain, that calling himself a widower shifted the narrative. People responded with empathy instead of judgment. Shifted the narrative. I asked what really happened. He admitted that she had left because she felt controlled, that he had struggled with jealousy, that he monitored her social interactions too closely, that she eventually could not handle it anymore. The more he spoke, the more pieces fell into place. The subtle possessiveness I had brushed off. The way he once questioned why I took so long to respond to a text. The way he asked detailed questions about my male coworkers. It had not been grief shaping his behavior. It had been control. I asked why he continued using the widower story years later. He said it helped him move forward, that it reframed his pain in a way that felt manageable. Manageable for him, but manipulative for everyone else. I felt foolish for how carefully I had handled him, how much patience I had extended, how I had softened my words out of respect for a loss that was not real. I told him he had built our connection on a lie. He argued that the emotional truth was the same, that the relationship ending had devastated him. But there is a difference between heartbreak and death. One involves another person still existing in the world. The other does not. After that conversation, I started noticing how often he used sympathy to navigate situations. How he leaned into the widower identity in subtle ways, the lowered voice, the distant stare. I ended things that day in the park. No dramatic scene, just a clear statement that I could not trust someone who rewrote reality for comfort. A few weeks later, a mutual acquaintance told me his ex-partner had moved out of state and was thriving, that she had spoken openly about how controlling the relationship had been. That confirmed everything. Sometimes I think about how easily he accessed empathy by borrowing a tragedy that was not his, how he used it as armor. The last time I saw him was driving past a coffee shop near where I live. He was sitting outside with someone new, leaning in, soft expression. I wondered what story he was telling her. I did not slow down to find out. I did not notice the pattern at first because it did not look like a pattern. It looked like convenience. It looked like someone who liked spending time with me. It looked like two adults naturally drifting closer. If you had walked into my apartment during those first few weeks, you would have just seen a guy's sneakers by the door and maybe a hoodie tossed over a chair in the living room. That is how it started. I matched with Connor on a random weekday afternoon when I was supposed to be answering emails. His profile said he was saving for a house. That caught my attention. It sounded responsible, forward-thinking. There were photos of him hiking, one in front of what looked like a half-renovated kitchen, one with a golden retriever that was not his but he said he borrowed sometimes. We started messaging, and he was easy to talk to. Not intense. Not overly polished. He worked in sales, rented a small place across town, so that he was focused on cutting expenses so he could eventually buy something of his own. I liked that he talked about long-term goals. Our first date was at a casual burger place near where I live. He showed up in a plain t-shirt and jeans, nothing flashy. We talked about childhood neighborhoods, about what kind of houses we grew up in. He mentioned wanting a yard someday, a garage, a place that felt permanent. After a couple dates, he started coming over more often. At first, it was just convenience. My apartment was closer to his office. Parking was easier. He would stay late and say it made sense to just crash at my place instead of driving back. I did not think much of it. He brought a small overnight bag the first time we stayed. Toiletries. A change of clothes. Normal. The overnight bag kept reappearing. Within 3 weeks, he had a drawer in my bedroom, not officially assigned. It just sort of filled up with his stuff. Socks, shirts, a belt. I told myself that was what happened when you dated someone consistently. One night, while we were cooking dinner, he mentioned that his landlord was increasing rent again. He said it casually, like a passing comment. Said it was ridiculous how expensive everything was getting. Said he was trying to stay disciplined because every dollar mattered for his house fund. I nodded sympathetically. The next weekend, he stayed at my place 4 nights in a row. I joked that he practically lived there. He laughed and said if only he could cut his rent in half, he would hit his savings goal twice as fast. That sentence stuck in my head. I started noticing that he rarely invited me to his apartment. When he did, it was brief, like he did not want me getting too comfortable there. His place was small but not terrible. Basic furniture, minimal decor. It felt temporary. Mine started feeling less like just mine. His toothbrush appeared next to mine. His laundry mixed with mine in the hamper. He would leave for work from my place more often than from his own. About 6 weeks in, I came home early one afternoon and found him in my living room on a work call. His shoes were off. His laptop was on my coffee table. It looked like he had been there all day. I asked if he had gone back to his place at all that week. He shrugged and said not really, that it made more sense to just stay where he was comfortable. Comfortable. I asked if he was still paying rent at his apartment. He said of course, but his tone felt off, slightly defensive. A few days later, I was at a friend's birthday dinner when I ran into someone who recognized me from social media. We chatted briefly, and she mentioned that she had dated a guy named Connor last year. My stomach tightened. I asked casually what happened. She laughed and said he practically moved in after 3 weeks, that he was always talking about saving for a house, but somehow never renewed his own lease. She said he bounced between girlfriends' apartments for almost a year. I felt a slow wave of realization wash over me. When I got home that night, I looked around my apartment differently. His jacket on the chair, his shoes by the door, his phone charger plugged into my wall permanently. I confronted him the next evening. I asked how long he had been rotating between places. He looked confused at first, then annoyed, said that was a dramatic way to frame it, that he just preferred staying with partners when things were going well. I asked if his lease was ending soon. He admitted he had not renewed it yet, that he was considering letting it lapse to save money, that it did not make sense to pay full rent if he was barely there. Barely there. I felt this mix of anger and embarrassment, not because he wanted to spend time with me, but because it felt strategic. I asked if he had done this before. He hesitated. Then he said sometimes it just worked out that way. Sometimes. I pressed further, asked how many women he had lived with unofficially. He said he did not keep count. That answer said everything. I realized he had been framing it as romance when it was actually rent avoidance. He talked about saving for a house like it was a noble goal, but he was saving by using other people's spaces as stepping stones. I asked what would happen if we broke up after he let his lease expire. He said he would figure it out. Figure it out. I thought about the drawer in my bedroom, about how easily he had blended into my routine, how he had made himself essential without ever asking directly. I told him he needed to move his things out by the end of the week. He acted surprised, said I was overreacting, that couples naturally merge spaces. I reminded him we had been dating less than 2 months. He tried to soften it, said he just felt close to me, that he wanted to build something solid. Solid does not mean free housing. Over the next few days, he packed slowly, too slowly, like he hoped I would change my mind. He made comments about how expensive storage units were, about how inconvenient it would be to move back to his place full time. I did not budge. The last night he came to collect his remaining things, he carried a medium-sized suitcase and 2 duffel bags out of my apartment. 2 duffel bags. That was more than just overnight stays. After he left, my space felt lighter. Not emotionally dramatic, just physically clearer. A month later, I heard through the same friend that he was now staying at another woman's place across town. His lease had officially ended. He was still talking about saving for a house. Sometimes I think about how easy it is to disguise dependency as commitment. How someone can make it look like closeness when it is actually convenience. The last text he sent me said he hoped one day I would understand that building a future requires sacrifices. I guess he meant mine. I wish this one had at least come with a warning label. Something small and honest like this is not real life. You are about to be part of a project. But no, it came wrapped in normalcy. In good morning texts and coffee dates and inside jokes that felt organic. I met Matthew during a stretch where I had almost given up on apps completely. I was tired. Tired of stories, tired of small lies, tired of feeling like every connection had some hidden twist. His profile looked harmless. Remote tech job. Likes board games. Into fitness but not obsessive. There was a photo of him holding a dog that looked slightly confused. We started messaging, and it was light at first. Playful. He did not overshare. He did not love bomb. He asked questions about my routine, my schedule, what I like to do on weekends. Nothing suspicious. Our first date was at a casual brunch place. Bright windows, loud coffee machine in the background. He was confident but not arrogant. He leaned forward when I spoke. He remembered small details from our chats. He talked about efficiency a lot, about optimizing time, about how modern dating was messy and unstructured. He said he liked clarity. I agreed with that. By the second week, he was texting me daily, not in an overwhelming way, just consistent. He would suggest specific times to meet, specific activities. He seemed organized. About 3 weeks in, he suggested we cook dinner together at his place. I agreed. His apartment was sleek but minimal. Clean counters. No clutter. Almost staged. While we were chopping vegetables, he asked me how I usually define a relationship timeline. I laughed and said I do not follow a formula, that it depends on chemistry. He nodded thoughtfully and said he appreciated that. Looking back, that was probably data collection. Over the next month, things escalated quickly but smoothly. He introduced me to a couple of his friends. He met one of mine. He talked casually about future trips. He asked what I would look for in a long-term partner. He said he valued commitment. It felt intentional. One evening, while we were sitting in my living room, he pulled out his laptop to show me a funny video. When he opened it, a notification popped up briefly in the corner. Something about a private group chat. The name of the chat was something like Phase 4. I did not think much of it at the time, maybe work-related. But then I noticed something else. A spreadsheet tab opened behind his browser. It had columns labeled Date 1, Date 2, Escalation Point, Emotional Response. My stomach tightened. He closed the laptop quickly and laughed it off. Said it was a project for work. Something about tracking user engagement. I wanted to believe him. A week later, I was at a mutual acquaintance's party when I overheard someone mention Matthew and his experiments. I froze. I casually asked what they meant. The guy laughed and said Matthew was part of this private group that tested dating theories, that they compared notes on how fast they could move relationships from match to exclusivity, that it was like a game. My chest felt hollow. I did not react immediately. I waited until the next day to confront him. I asked directly if he was part of any group that analyzed dating patterns. He tried to play confused at first. Then he sighed and admitted he and a few friends liked to test hypotheses about modern dating. That it was harmless. That it was just curiosity. Curiosity. I asked what exactly they were testing. He said things like how quickly vulnerability creates attachment, how soon discussing future plans increases commitment, how strategic texting affects response rates. He spoke calmly, academically. I felt like a lab subject. I asked if he had documented our timeline. He hesitated. Then he admitted yes. He said he never used my name, that it was anonymous, that it was about patterns, not individuals. Patterns still require participants. I asked how many women were part of this. He said a handful at any given time, that they would compare results in a group, see who achieved exclusivity fastest, who could prompt discussions about moving in within a certain number of weeks. Achieved. Like it was a trophy. I felt anger rise slowly, not explosive, just steady. I asked if any of the women knew they were part of this. He said telling them would skew the data. Data again. I realized that every meaningful conversation we had might have been strategic. Every vulnerable moment potentially analyzed later in a group chat. I asked if he actually liked me or if I was just performing well in his experiment. He said it started as an experiment, but he had developed genuine feelings. That sentence did not help. I asked to see the spreadsheet. He resisted at first, then reluctantly opened his laptop. There it was. Rows with coded initials, dates, notes about reactions, comments like responded positively to future talk, increased texting frequency after compliment, suggested weekend trip on day 21. I found my row. It listed milestones, first kiss, first sleepover, discussion about exclusivity. In the notes column next exclusivity, it said likely to agree within 2 weeks if prompted. I felt sick. He tried to explain that it was about understanding human behavior, that modern dating lacked structure and they were just mapping it, that no one was harmed. No one was harmed. I felt harmed. I told him he had manipulated real emotions for sport. He argued that influence exists in all relationships, that at least he was studying it intentionally. Intentionally does not equal ethically. I ended it that night. He tried to convince me that I was reacting emotionally instead of logically, that our connection was still valid. But I could not unsee the spreadsheet. After we broke up, I thought about how carefully he had paced everything, how seamless it had felt, how deliberate. A few weeks later, a friend sent me a screenshot from a private forum someone had leaked. It showed part of a discussion about accelerating attachment timelines. Matthew's username was visible. I felt a mix of validation and exhaustion. Sometimes I wonder if he ever stopped seeing relationships as experiments, or if he still tracks metrics instead of moments. The last thing he said to me was that in any system, understanding the variables gives you an advantage. I did not want to be a variable. I did not find out about Aaron because he slipped up. I found out because I am observant, or maybe because I have been burned enough times to notice small inconsistencies that other people would ignore. When I first met him, he felt a reward after a long losing streak, attentive without being intense, funny without trying too hard. He asked about my day and actually remembered the details the next time we spoke. He sent good morning texts that were simple, not poetic, not overly curated, just consistent. We matched on a Wednesday night. His profile was warm. Photos of friends at what looked like a backyard barbecue. One picture of him hiking at sunrise. His bio said he believed in intentional dating and did not like wasting time. That sounded refreshing. Our first date was at a quiet wine bar across town. He showed up 5 minutes early and had already grabbed a table. He stood up when I walked in, small things that felt thoughtful. He asked about my job, my family, what I was looking for long-term. He said he valued exclusivity and clarity. That modern dating felt chaotic and he preferred focus. Focus. Over the next few weeks, he seemed incredibly attentive. If I mentioned liking a specific dessert, he would show up with it a few days later. If I had a stressful meeting, he would text afterward asking how it went. I started to relax around him. We usually met in my neighborhood. He said it was easier for him because he worked remotely and could adjust his schedule. Sometimes we met near his place, but he never invited me over for long stretches, just quick visits. About a month in, I noticed something small. One Friday evening, I suggested grabbing dinner spontaneously. He replied that he had a prior commitment in another part of the city. No details, just busy. The next week, same thing. Friday evening, unavailable. Saturday afternoons also blocked. I did not think much of it at first. People have lives. But then one Sunday morning, while we were sitting in our living room drinking coffee, his phone buzzed repeatedly. He glanced at it quickly and flipped it over. I caught a glimpse of a notification that said reminder date East Side 2 p.m. East Side. We were on the West Side. I asked casually what he had planned later. He said he was meeting a friend for brunch. Friend. Something about the tone felt rehearsed. A few days later, I was at a bookstore near where I live when I saw him through the window of a cafe across the street. He was sitting at a small table with a woman I did not recognize. They were leaning in close, laughing. My stomach dropped. I stayed still for a moment, watching. He reached across the table and touched her hand lightly, not in a casual friend way. I walked away before he could see me. That night, he texted me like nothing had happened, asked how my day was, sent a photo of his dinner. I did not confront him immediately. I wanted more information. A week later, while we were at his place briefly before heading out, he went to shower. His laptop was open on the desk. I was not planning to snoop, but a calendar notification popped up on the screen. Color-coded blocks filled the entire month. Each block had initials. My initials were in blue. Other initials were in red, green, yellow. I felt a slow wave of realization move through me. I leaned closer. Each color corresponded to a different neighborhood. Blue West Side, red East Side, green downtown. My chest tightened. There were notes attached to some of the blocks. Dinner reservation, movie night, hiking. I found the current week. My name was scheduled for Thursday, another set of initials for Friday, different initials for Saturday morning. He was not just casually dating multiple women. He was scheduling us strategically to avoid overlap. Efficient dating. That phrase would come later. I stepped back from the desk just as he walked out of the bathroom. I confronted him that night in his living room. I told him I had seen the cafe, that I had seen the calendar. For a second, he looked caught, then he relaxed. He said he never promised exclusivity. Technically true. We had not had that explicit conversation yet, but he had spoken often about focus, about intentional dating. I asked how many women were color-coded in his calendar. He said 4 currently. 4. He explained it calmly, said modern dating is a numbers game, that until there is a defined commitment, it makes sense to explore options, that he schedules in different neighborhoods to minimize awkward encounters. Minimize awkward encounters. Like we were appointments. I asked if the other women knew about each other. He said not in detail. Of course not. I felt embarrassed thinking about how special I had felt when he remembered my favorite dessert, how attentive he seemed, how consistent. Consistency is easier when it is templated. He even admitted that he had optimized his schedule to see multiple women in one weekend by clustering locations. Clustered locations. I asked if he saw anything wrong with it. He shrugged and said it was efficient. Efficient dating. That was his phrase. I asked if he ever planned to narrow it down. He said eventually, when someone clearly stood out. Stood out. I realized then that I had been competing without knowing there was a competition. I ended it that night. He did not fight hard. He just looked mildly disappointed, like losing one option in the lineup. A few weeks later, a mutual acquaintance mentioned seeing him out with someone new. Different woman. Same attentive energy. Sometimes I think about that color-coded calendar. How organized it was. How neatly compartmentalized each woman had been. Blue for me. Just a block of time between 7 and 10 p.m. The last message he sent me said he hoped I would not take his approach personally, that he believed in maximizing opportunity. I blocked him. I used to think oversharing was my flaw, like maybe I talked too much when I felt comfortable. Maybe I trusted too easily when someone asked the right questions in the right tone. After Colin, I stopped blaming myself for that. When I met him, he came across as emotionally aware in a calm, almost clinical way. His profile said he cared deeply about mental health advocacy. There were photos of him at charity runs, one volunteering at a fundraiser, one sitting cross-legged on a yoga mat smiling softly at the camera. We matched on a quiet Sunday. He messaged first, something thoughtful about a book I had mentioned in my bio, not a generic compliment, something specific that caught my attention. Our conversations moved quickly into deeper territory, not in a forced way, but naturally. He would ask how past relationships shaped my communication style. He would ask what kind of arguments triggered me most and why. He framed it as wanting to understand patterns early. It felt mature. We met at a small cafe near where I live. He was gentle, soft-spoken. He made eye contact without staring. He listened with his whole face, nodding slightly when I explained something. By the second take, he asked about my childhood, about whether my parents were emotionally available, about moments when I felt unseen. I answered honestly. It felt safe at the time. Over the next month, he positioned himself as someone who valued transparency above all else. He would occasionally share small details about his own struggles. Nothing too raw, but enough to create balance. One evening, we were sitting in my living room talking about past breakups. I told him about a relationship that ended abruptly and how it left me anxious for months. He leaned forward and asked precise follow-up questions. How did I react in the weeks after? Did I seek reassurance frequently? Did I withdraw? It felt like a therapy session, but in a comforting way. I started to appreciate how structured his curiosity was. About 6 weeks in, I met 2 of his friends at a trivia night. They were friendly. One of them made a joke about Colin always having the best case studies. Case studies. I laughed it off at first. But later that night, as we were walking back to our cars, one of the friends asked me casually how I was handling my abandonment triggers lately. My chest tightened. I had only ever used that phrase once, in a private conversation with Colin. I asked how he knew that term. He looked confused for a second and said Colin mentioned it once in a discussion about attachment styles. Discussion. I felt a slow chill run through me. The next time I went to Colin's apartment, I noticed a small leather notebook on his desk. It was closed, but there were colored tabs sticking out from the sides. I did not touch it, but the presence of it lingered in my mind. A few days later, we were at his place again. He went to take a call in the other room and left his desk open. The notebook was there again, this time slightly ajar. I did not plan to look, but my eyes caught a familiar phrase written in neat handwriting on the exposed page. Needs reassurance during uncertainty. My stomach dropped. I moved closer. There were bullet points, short descriptions, behavioral notes, emotional responses, each section separated by initials. I recognized mine. My hands started shaking. There were detailed observations. Prefers direct communication after conflict. Heightened anxiety if messages go unanswered more than 3 hours. Softens boundaries when fearing loss. I felt like I was reading a psychological profile. I stepped back just as he returned to the room. I confronted him immediately. I asked why he was taking notes about me. He froze for a split second, then said he tracks patterns to improve communication. Tracks patterns. I asked why his friends knew about my triggers. He said he values group discussion when it comes to growth, that he and his friends often debrief their relationships to learn from each other. Debrief. I felt exposed in a way that was hard to explain, not because he had observed things. Observation is natural, but because he had documented them, categorized them, shared them. I asked how many pages were about me. He hesitated, then admitted that he keeps notes on everyone he dates, that it helps him identify compatibility and strategy. Strategy. I asked what kind of strategy requires documenting someone's vulnerabilities. He said understanding someone's triggers allows you to navigate them more effectively. Navigate. I felt a mix of anger and humiliation. I asked if he ever used the information to influence outcomes. He did not deny it. He said if he knew reassurance calmed me, he would provide it strategically during tense moments to stabilize the dynamic. Strategically. That word kept repeating in my head. I realized then that some of his most comforting gestures might have been calculated. I asked if he had ever intentionally withheld reassurance to test my reactions. He looked uncomfortable. That was answer enough. The thought made me feel physically ill. He tried to frame it as growth, as self-improvement, as refining relational skills. but it felt like surveillance. I told him I was not comfortable being analyzed like a project. He said everyone analyzes partners subconsciously. He just externalized the process. Externalized. But he had also shared it, turned my private disclosures into group discussion material. I ended it that night. He looked genuinely surprised, like he believed his method was helpful. A week later, a mutual acquaintance mentioned that Colin had presented a funny summary at a dinner about communication styles and dating. Apparently, it got laughs. I did not ask for details. Sometimes I think about that notebook, about how neatly my fears were bullet pointed. The last message he sent me said he'd hope I would appreciate someday that his intentions were constructive. I blocked him. I did not find the wedding photos because I was snooping. I found them because his last name was uncommon and I was bored one night. That is the part that still feels unreal. I was not even suspicious at the time. I was just lying on my couch in the living room, half watching a show, half scrolling through random stuff on my phone. Owen and I had been dating for about 2 months. Steady. Uncomplicated. He was quiet in a comforting way. Worked in finance. Liked early mornings and long runs. His profile had said never married, never engaged, no kids. He even joked on our first date that he had managed to avoid the wedding industrial complex so far. We met at a bookstore cafe near where I live. He was wearing a navy sweater and looked slightly nervous but sweet. He asked about my job, my family, my goals. He talked about wanting something intentional. Not rushed, but serious. I remember feeling relieved that he had no complicated past attachments. No ex-wife drama. No co-parenting schedules. Just clean. Over the next few weeks, he integrated into my routine easily. Sunday grocery runs, midweek dinners, watching documentaries on my couch. He was not flashy or dramatic, just steady. One night, we were talking about weddings in general because a friend of mine had just gotten engaged. I asked casually if he had ever been close to that step with anyone. He said no, that he had dated seriously before, but never proposed. That timing was always off. Timing was always off. It sounded believable. So that random night on my couch, when I typed his full name into a search bar out of boredom, I was not expecting anything dramatic. Maybe a LinkedIn profile. Maybe an old sports article. Instead, I found a wedding website. The kind couples make you share details with guests, photos at the top, their story underneath. My heart started pounding. I clicked it. There he was, smiling in a suit, standing next to a woman in a white dress. The date listed was from the previous year. Previous year. I stared at the screen, trying to process. The website was still live. Photos from the engagement shoot. Pictures of the ceremony venue. Captions about forever. I felt like my brain had split in half. I scrolled further and found tagged photos on social media from guests. The same images, the same date. There was no mention of cancellation. I checked the woman's profile. It was public. She had photos from that day. Photos of them together. But then, a few months later, posts about moving on. Cryptic captions about healing. I felt dizzy. The next time I saw him, I did not confront him immediately. I needed to hear him say something first. We were sitting in a restaurant when I asked casually if he had ever been engaged. He said no again, smoothly. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table with the wedding website open. The color drained from his face. He looked at the screen for a long second, then exhaled. He said it was not a real engagement. Not a real engagement. I asked what that meant. He explained that they had planned a wedding quickly, that things fell apart before the legal paperwork was filed, that they went through with the ceremony but never submitted the marriage license. Ceremony but no license. He said since it never became legally binding, he did not consider it a true engagement or marriage. I felt anger rise slowly. I asked if guests had attended. He said yes. I asked if vows were exchanged. He said yes. I asked if rings were exchanged. He said yes. But because the paperwork was not filed, he believed it did not count. He said the relationship imploded right before the official registration, that they'd both agreed to walk away, that it was messy and painful. Painful does not erase reality. I asked why he told me he had never been engaged. He said saying yes to that question would require a complicated explanation, that it'd scare people off. That technically, in his mind, it was not legitimate. In his mind. I felt betrayed, not because of the failed wedding itself, but because he had decided unilaterally that it did not matter. I asked how many people in his life knew about it. He said everyone close to him. Friends, family, coworkers. So I was the only one being told a revised version. He said he did not want to relive it, that he wanted a fresh start. A fresh start built on a mission. Over the next hour, more details surfaced. The relationship had ended due to trust issues. Accusations of emotional detachment. Disagreements about commitment. She had wanted certainty. He had hesitated. The pattern felt familiar. I asked if he had learned anything from it. He said he learned not to rush, but he had not learned to disclose. I left the restaurant feeling numb. A few days later, I heard from a mutual acquaintance that his former fiancée had been devastated, that she had found out he was dating again within months. The idea that he could compartmentalize such a major life event into something that did not count unsettled me deeply. Sometimes I think about how easily he dismissed it, how calm he remained while explaining that a ceremony with vows did not qualify because of paperwork. The last message he sent me said he hoped I would understand that not all events deserve permanent labels. I blocked him. I still remember the wedding photo, the way he looked at her in that image, certain, smiling. Apparently that did not count either. I did not fall for Ryan because he was charming. I fell for him because he looked useful. That sounds harsh, but it is true. After everything I had been through, I thought maybe the safest kind of man was one who spent his weekends helping other people. His profile had multiple photos of him at what looked like a local animal shelter. In one, he was kneeling next to a dog with a bandaged paw. In another, he was carrying a box labeled donations. His bio mentioned volunteering every Saturday morning. He said giving back kept him grounded. Grounded sounded good. We matched on a slow Monday evening. His first message referenced a charity event I had attended months earlier that was visible on my social media. He said he admired community involvement. Our first date was at a quiet coffee shop near where I live. He showed up wearing a hoodie with the shelter's logo on it. He talked about the dogs by name, about how certain ones were harder to adopt out, about how important it was to show up consistently. Consistently. I like that word. Over the next few weeks, he wove volunteering into his identity seamlessly. He would say he had to leave early because he had a shift at the shelter. He would send photos of dogs in kennels with captions about patience and care. It felt wholesome. About a month in, he invited me to join him one Saturday morning. He said it would be fun for me to see what he does. I agreed. We drove to the shelter together. It was smaller than I expected. Modest building, fenced yard. When we walked in, the front desk volunteer looked slightly confused when Ryan greeted her. She asked if he was there for orientation. Orientation. He laughed and said no, he volunteers regularly. She checked a clipboard and then nodded slowly. I felt a small flicker of unease. Inside, he seemed less confident than usual. He asked staff members basic questions about where supplies were kept. He hesitated when handling one of the dogs, like he was unsure. At one point, a staff member thanked him for coming out to help for the weekend event. Weekend event. I asked quietly how often he usually came. He said whenever he could. That phrasing felt vague. After we left, I told myself maybe he just did not volunteer as consistently as he implied. Maybe he exaggerated a bit. But then a few days later, I was scrolling online and saw a recent photo on the shelter's public page. It was from a fundraising event. Ryan was in the background of holding a leash. The caption thanked first-time volunteers for their support. First-time volunteers. My chest tightened. I clicked through older posts. I did not see him at any before that event. I confronted him gently that evening. I asked how long he had been volunteering. He said a few months. I told him the shelter page called him a first-time volunteer last week. He paused. Then admitted he had not been going every Saturday, that he had only attended a handful of events, that he sometimes stopped by to take photos and help briefly. Take photos. I asked why his profile made it seem like a weekly commitment. He said it was aspirational, that he wanted to be more involved and thought putting it out there would motivate him. Aspirational. But the photos were not motivational tools. They were curated images, carefully framed, good lighting, dogs positioned close to him. I realized he had been using volunteer events as backdrops. I asked if he had any ongoing involvement, any recurring shifts, any scheduled responsibilities. He admitted no. He said he donated occasionally, that he believed in the cause, that he just had not had the time to commit fully. Time to commit. Yet he had time to take photos. I felt disappointed more than angry. It was not a huge betrayal, not like some of the others, but it was a misrepresentation of character. He had built a narrative of selflessness that did not exist in the way he described. I started noticing other small exaggerations. He mentioned mentoring youth at one point. Turned out he had spoken at one school assembly once. He said he ran charity races annually. He had signed up for one 5-kilometer run last year. Everything was slightly inflated. Not outright lies, just curated versions. A week later, I ran into someone I knew who actually volunteered at the shelter regularly. I asked casually if they knew Ryan. They frowned slightly and said he came to one event and spent most of the time taking pictures for his social media. That staff had joked about influencers using the shelter for content. Content. That word stung. When I confronted him again, he grew defensive. Said everyone uses social media to highlight the best parts of their lives. Said it was marketing. Marketing. I asked what exactly he was marketing. He did not have a clear answer. I realized then that he wanted the image of generosity without the routine of it, the aesthetic of service without the structure. I ended it quietly. He tried to argue that I was being overly critical, that intentions matter more than frequency. But consistency reveals intention more than captions do. A month later, I saw a new photo on his profile, him holding a different dog. Same angle, same expression. The caption said giving back is everything. I closed the app. Sometimes I think about how easy it is to borrow goodness from a setting, how standing next to something pure can make you look pure too. The last thing he texted me was that he hoped I would not judge him too harshly for trying. Trying and posing are not the same thing. I remember the exact moment everything shifted with Zachary. It was not dramatic. There was no yelling, no slammed doors. It was just a sentence dropped casually over takeout containers on my coffee table in the living room. But before that moment, he felt solid. We matched on a quiet evening when I was half watching a cooking show and half scrolling out of habit. His profile was clean and simple, said he valued independence, that he believed two strong individuals make the best partnerships. There were photos of him at a gym, one hiking, one sitting at a desk with what looked like spreadsheets open on his laptop. Independence stood out to me. After everything, that word felt safe. We started talking and he was direct. No games. He said he worked in logistics, that he liked structure, that he respected ambition. He asked about my goals in a way that felt curious, not competitive. Our first date was at a small ramen place near where I live. He was punctual, polite, not overly charming but steady. He talked about financial discipline like it was a personality trait, about budgeting apps and long-term planning. I appreciated that. Stability sounded good. Over the next month, we settled into a rhythm. Weeknight dinners, weekend hikes, movie nights on my couch. He was attentive, but not clingy. He would send short texts during the day just to check in. Nothing excessive. One evening, he mentioned he had been working aggressively to pay down debt. He said it casually, like it was just part of adult life. I asked what kind of debt, and he said student loans mostly, plus some credit card balances from years ago. He framed it as a phase, something he was managing responsibly. I respected the honesty. About 6 weeks in, he started talking more about the concept of partnership. Not romance specifically, more like structure. He said he believed couples should operate as a team financially, that merging resources shows trust. I nodded but did not engage deeply. One night, sitting in my living room with takeout containers open, he brought it up more directly. He said he had been thinking about long-term commitment, about how true partnership involves shared liability. Shared liability. I laughed lightly at first because it sounded like something from a contract. He did not laugh. He said merging finances early in a serious relationship can accelerate growth, that combining credit profiles and incomes can unlock opportunities faster. Unlock opportunities. I asked what he meant exactly. He said if two people truly believe in each other, they should be willing to co-sign for major purchases. That love is about shared risk. Shared risk. My stomach tightened slightly. I asked if he was suggesting something specific. He said he had significant debt remaining, more than he initially implied, and that if we were serious, combining accounts or at least co-signing could help him secure better rates and consolidate faster. There it was. I asked how much debt. He hesitated before giving a rough number. It was much higher than what he had previously described. Much higher. I asked why he had not mentioned that earlier. He said he did not want to scare me off, that people misunderstand debt without context. Context. I asked why merging finances would benefit me. He said in a committed relationship, individual benefit becomes collective benefit. That answer felt slippery. I started asking more detailed questions. What kind of debt? What interest rates? What timeline for repayment? The more he explained, the more complicated it sounded. Multiple credit cards, personal loans, some missed payments from years ago that were still impacting his credit score. And now he wanted to tie mine to his. He framed it as symbolic, said it would prove commitment, that it would show I believe in his ability to turn things around. Prove commitment. I felt a mix of disbelief and clarity. I asked if he would merge finances with me if the situation were reversed. He said, of course, if he believed in the relationship. But belief is easier when you are the one benefiting. I told him it felt premature, that we had been dating barely 2 months. He said timelines are arbitrary when the connection is strong. Strong connection does not erase risk. Over the next week, he brought it up again subtly, sending me articles about couples who built wealth through early financial integration, stories about trust and teamwork. Teamwork. It started to feel less like a suggestion and more like pressure. I did some quiet research on my own, looked at the implications of co-signing, how liability works if payments are missed, how credit scores can be impacted. The risks were not abstract. I confronted him again. I told him I was not comfortable merging finances or co-signing anything at this stage. His tone shifted slightly, not angry, but disappointed. He said he thought I valued independence and partnership, that my hesitation suggested a lack of faith. Faith. I realized then that he was reframing caution as betrayal. I asked if he had asked any previous partners to do the same. He admitted he had floated the idea before, but said they were not ready for that level of commitment. Not ready. I wondered how many women he had tried to tie to his debt under the banner of love. I told him clearly that my financial stability was not a test of devotion. He went quiet for a long moment. Then he said he respected my boundary, but added that true partnership requires vulnerability. Vulnerability is not the same as liability. That was the moment everything shifted for me. I saw him differently, not as independent and disciplined, but as someone looking for reinforcement, someone who equated commitment with shared financial burden. We ended things a few days later. He said he hoped I would eventually find someone willing to invest fully in a future together. Invest fully. I did not respond. Sometimes I think about how easily language can make risk sound romantic, how shared liability can be dressed up as unity. The last thing he texted me was that love means stepping into uncertainty together. I agree with that. Just not when the uncertainty comes with someone else's undisclosed debt. By the time I met Christopher, I thought I had seen every possible variation of strange. Fake widowers, social experiments, color-coded calendars. I thought my pattern recognition was sharp enough to catch anything unusual early. Christopher did not set off any alarms. His profile was open in a way that felt almost refreshing. He listed his job clearly. Mentioned his hobbies without exaggeration. Said he believed in transparency and accountability. There were photos of him in a museum, one hiking, one sitting at what looked like a family dinner. We started talking on a quiet evening when I was half paying attention to my phone. He asked direct questions about what I was looking for. He said he did not believe in wasting time. That clarity prevents hurt. Clarity sounded good. Our first date was at a casual wine bar not far from where I live. He was confident, but not overpowering. He asked about my past relationships, but did not pry too hard. He spoke about his own history in broad strokes. Nothing dramatic. What stood out was how attentive he was to details. If I mentioned a former employer, he asked about the specific role. If I talked about a city I used to live in, he asked what neighborhood. It felt like curiosity. Over the next few weeks, he seemed incredibly consistent. Good morning texts, check-ins during the day, plans made in advance. He talked about how much he valued honesty and how many people hide things early in dating. I remember thinking maybe this one is just normal. About a month in, something small happened that I almost ignored. I got a message from an old coworker I had not spoken to in years. He asked casually if I was applying for a new position. Confused, I asked why. He said someone had called the office pretending to verify my employment history for a professional reference. My stomach tightened. I had not applied anywhere. I asked what name the caller gave. He told me. It was Christopher. I felt like the room tilted. I did not confront him immediately. I needed to think. 2 days later, I got another message. This time from my former landlord. He asked if everything was okay. Said someone had reached out asking about my rental history under the pretense of a background inquiry. Again, Christopher's name surfaced. My chest felt hollow. When I confronted him, we were sitting in my living room. He looked calm, almost prepared. I asked directly if he had contacted my former employer and landlord. He did not deny it. He said he believed in due diligence. Due diligence. I stared at him, waiting for him to realize how invasive that sounded. He said in modern dating people lie constantly, that he had been deceived before, that verifying information early prevents bigger problems later. Verifying information. I asked why he did not just ask me directly. He said people present curated versions of themselves, that independent confirmation is more reliable. Independent confirmation. I felt exposed in a way that was different from the others. This was not about emotional manipulation or image crafting. This was about surveillance. I asked if he had run any formal background checks. He hesitated slightly, then admitted he had used online services to look into criminal records, property records, and social media history. He said it casually, like it was normal. I asked how long he had been doing this to women he dated. He said for years. Years. I felt anger rise, sharp and immediate. I asked if he had found anything alarming about me. He said no, that everything checked out. Checked out. As if I were a product. I asked what would have happened if something minor had shown up. An old traffic ticket. A misunderstanding. He said he would have evaluated it rationally. Evaluated. I realized then that he had been assessing me from the start. Every detail I shared cross-referenced. Every anecdote potentially verified. He even admitted that he sometimes contacts references under neutral pretexts to gauge tone, that it reveals character beyond self-reporting. Tone. He had called my former employer to gauge tone. I asked if he thought that was ethical. He said transparency is earned. Earned. I told him trust cannot grow under investigation. He countered that in business, background checks are standard, that relationships are high-stakes investments. Investments. There it was again, the language of transaction. I felt humiliated thinking about my coworker receiving that call, my landlord being contacted, how easily he inserted himself into my past without consent. I asked why he did not disclose this practice up front. He said most people react emotionally to it before understanding the logic. Logic does not erase violation. I ended it that night. He did not argue much. He said he respected my feelings but stood by his method. Method. A week later, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he had contacted another woman's college friend under the guise of verifying a story. It was not personal to him. It was protocol. Sometimes I think about how trust requires vulnerability from both sides, and how impossible it is to be vulnerable with someone who is quietly auditing you. The last message he sent me said he hoped I would find someone who values security as much as he does. I did not respond. I blocked his number and changed a few privacy settings on my accounts that night.